I noticed her at 2:47 p.m., 11 minutes before the service began. She was standing at the back of the funeral home, in the kind of shadow a room makes when a person has chosen not to be seen. She was in her late 60s. She was wearing a black coat that had been worn past the place where coats usually stop being worn, cuffs frayed, a button missing at the wrist, a small tear near the hem that had been pinned, not stitched. She had no flowers. She had no card on the table at the entrance. She had signed no register. She had come into the room the way a person comes into a room when they have been trying to come into it for a long time, and have only now, finally, found the door. I did not know her. I had been standing at the front of the room, in the seat reserved for the only child, in the dress my mother had once said I looked like a young widow in, adjusting the hem every 4 minutes the way I had been doing since I was 8. I had been pretending to read the program. I had been pretending to look at the photograph at the front. I had not been reading. I had not been looking. I had been doing what a daughter does at her mother's funeral, when she has not yet accepted that her mother is no longer in the room, looking for her mother in the corners, in the floor, in the lamp. I had not found her. I had been looking since 2 p.m. I had been looking since the night before, since the early morning, since the morning the hospice nurse had called and said, very gently, that my mother's breathing had changed in a way that meant my mother was going. I had been looking for my mother for the entire 12 hours between the call and the arrival at this room, in my mother's kitchen, in my mother's bedroom, in my mother's chair. I had not found her. My mother had been gone for 12 hours, and I had not found her anywhere. At 2:48 p.m., the woman at the back of the room looked up. She looked up the way a person looks up when they have been looking at the floor and have decided, finally, to look at the photograph at the front. She looked up and she looked directly at me, and I felt the look land on me in a way I had never felt a look land. I had felt my father's look land. I had felt my husband's. I had felt my son's, when he was 2, and he had looked at me across the courtyard of a hospital and said, with his eyes, the first complete sentence of his life. I had felt my mother's. I had never felt a stranger's. She did not look away from me. I did not look away from her. We looked at each other, in the room, in the shadow, in the 11 minutes between the time I noticed her and the time the service began. We looked at each other in the only way strangers can look at each other at a funeral, as if one of them knows something the other has not yet been told. My mother was the smallest, loudest, most difficult person I have ever known. Her name was Ruth. She was 78. She had been the daughter of a man who sold produce out of a truck in southern Pennsylvania, and the wife of a man who sold insurance out of a briefcase in northern New Jersey. She had been a teacher of second graders for 41 years. She had worn the same 3 cardigans for 20 years, in rotation, with a small hole in the left elbow she had refused to mend because, she said, the hole had been made by my son's head when he was 6 and had fallen asleep on her shoulder at Christmas in 2008. She had raised me in 3 sentences. The first was, sit up. The second was, finish what you started. The third was, tell the truth even when it costs you money, because money comes back and trust does not. I had been her only child. I had been her only child in the way a person is only a child. By obligation, by blood, by the inadvertent accident of one night in 1973 in a small house in New Jersey, when my father had come home from a convention 3 days early, and my mother had answered the door in the green dress, and they had, briefly, not been 2 people. I had inherited from her the smallest parts, the way I hold a fork, the way I sigh when I am tired, the way my left eye twitches when I am about to lie. I had inherited from her the largest parts, the way I answer the phone by saying the caller's full name, the way I keep my hands busy when I am grieving, the way I stand across from a stranger at a funeral and feel the stranger looking at me without turning my head. My mother had died at 4:14 a.m. on a Saturday in October. She had died with her hand on the small of my back, in the bed, in the room, in the house she had lived in for 54 years, and that I had inherited the day before, with the proviso that I was not to sell the kitchen table, because the kitchen table had been hers and her mother's and the mother before that. I had not yet processed the inheritance. I had not yet processed the kitchen table. I had been processing, since 4:14 a.m., only the absence. The absence of her hand on the small of my back, the absence of her voice in the kitchen, the absence of her, in the room, in the chair, in the place in the courtyard of my life where she had been, without fail, for 52 years. The funeral I had planned wrong. The funeral had been my mother's idea. My mother had in the spring sat down with me at the kitchen table, with a small notebook she had used since she was 26, and had told me exactly what she wanted. She wanted a small service at the funeral home 2 streets over from our house. She wanted the photograph from 1976, when she and my father had gone to Maine for 2 nights, and had come back looking like they had been in the sun. She wanted a small harpist. She wanted 2 hymns. She wanted the funeral director to wear a different tie. She wanted, on the program, the third stanza only of an Emily Dickinson poem she had loved since she was 19. She wanted no flowers from anyone except me, and she wanted me to bring only one, a single white peony. I had honored every part of it. I had ordered the peony for Friday. I had printed the program. I had asked the harpist. I had called the funeral director and told him about the tie. I had forgotten the photograph. I had forgotten to bring the photograph from 1976. I had been so focused on the peony and the harpist and the tie that I had forgotten the part of the funeral where my mother would be in the room. I had walked into the funeral home with a folded program and no photograph, and a peony that had wilted in the cab. The funeral director had asked me what I wanted to put at the front. I had stood there, in the lobby, with the wilted peony in my hand, and I had not answered. The funeral director had said, gently, "We have a photograph, don't worry." I had said no, thank you, I will find one. I had gone into the bathroom. I had stood at the sink. I had looked at my own face in the mirror. I had seen, in my own face, the woman from 1976, and I had understood, for the first time that day, that I was not going to be putting her photograph at the front of this room. I was going to be standing in this room, in the same dress, with the same eye twitch, with the same hands she had, and I was going to be the photograph. The funeral director had in the end used a photograph from 2015. My mother at 70, with my son, who was 13. In the photograph she was laughing, and he was laughing, and they were holding a watermelon between them the size of a small child. It had not been what she wanted, but it had been her. It had been her laughing. It had been her holding something for the size of it. The way the service went. The service went the way services go when they have been planned with a notebook, and the notebook is in the wrong pocket. I sat at the front. I cried at the wrong part. I cried during the second hymn, the one I had thought I would not cry during. My son, who is 28 and who had flown in from a job in Berlin, sat beside me and held his hand on my knee. My husband, who is 71 and who has held my hand through most of a marriage, sat on my other side and held that hand. The harpist played the third stanza only of the hymn, the way I had asked, but I had not realized that asking for a single stanza of a hymn at a funeral is the kind of small, precise instruction that makes the entire room hold its breath. The eulogies were two. My cousin Tessa read from a letter my mother had written her in 1994, when Tessa was 23 and had been afraid of getting married. My mother had written, "Do not marry him if you are afraid. Marry him only if you are afraid to lose him. The two fears are different, and one of them is the love." My cousin had not heard the letter read aloud before. She cried at the second sentence. The second eulogy was mine. I had written it in a single sitting, at 3 a.m., in the kitchen, with the notebook open to the page where my mother had told me her funeral instructions, and I had not realized, until I was halfway through reading it, that I had folded the page over and was reading my mother's funeral instructions into a microphone in front of 43 people. I had stopped. I had laughed, briefly, in the way a person laughs at a funeral when the dead person has just done the dead person's most characteristic thing. The room had laughed. The peony was on the table at the front. The white photograph from 1976 was not in the room. The watermelon photograph was. At the end of the service, I had not yet understood what the woman at the back of the room was about to tell me. The card she did not sign. After the service, the room became the kind of room a funeral home becomes after a service, a congregation of the living, holding small cups of water, speaking in voices not much above a murmur. I stood near the front and shook hands. I shook hands with my cousin. I shook hands with my neighbor. I shook hands with the man who had sold my mother her tomatoes every Saturday for 13 years. I shook hands with my father-in-law, who was 91, and had been driven to the service by my husband because he had said he had wanted to come and had not said why. I shook hands with strangers. I shook hands with people I had never seen at my mother's house. I shook hands with a woman from the church my mother had stopped attending in 2002. I shook hands with a man from the dry cleaners who had pressed my mother's blouses for 31 years and who had, until this afternoon, not known he was going to be at her funeral. The woman at the back of the room did not come forward. She stood, all afternoon, in the same shadow, with a single glove in one hand and nothing in the other. She watched. She did not approach. She waited with the kind of patience that is not patience, but is the slow accumulation of a thing a person has been carrying for a long time. At 3:14 p.m., the room was nearly empty. My son had gone to the lobby with my husband. My cousin was on the phone. The funeral director was folding chairs. The harpist was packing her harp. The woman walked forward. She walked the way a person walks when they have, in their life, taken a large number of slow walks like this one, measured, careful, with the kind of attention a person gives to a thing that is not reversible. She crossed the room. She came to stand in front of me. I did not move, she said, in a voice that was older than her face, in a voice that was the kind of voice a person has when they have been using it for a long time and have not been using it well. Are you her only child? I nodded. She said, she had another. The word I could not pronounce. I did not speak. I stood in the room with my mother's photograph at the front, and the wilted peony on the table, and the harpist packing her harp, and I stood in front of a woman I had never seen, who had just said a sentence I could not make any sense of. She said, she had another child. Before you, she had a son. He was 3 when he died. I did not speak. She said, I am his mother. I sat down. I sat down on the small wooden chair that was at the front of the room, and that the funeral director had not yet folded up. My hands were on my knees. I was gripping my knees. I was gripping my knees the way my mother had gripped her own knees at my father's funeral, in 2007, in the same chair, in a different funeral home, in a different dress. The woman said, his name was Daniel. He was 3. He died in 1971. Your mother was not married then. Your mother was 24. She was working at the school in Trenton. She had placed him with me because she could not afford to keep him. She had been trying to bring him home. She had been trying for 2 years. She had been trying to bring him home the week he died. I did not speak. She said, she wrote to me every year, once a year, on his birthday. She wrote, in the same hand, on the same paper, the same envelope, the same stamp. She wrote, every year, for 55 years. She wrote, every year, I am trying, I have not forgotten, I will try again next year. She wrote, every year, until last year. Last year she wrote, I am dying. I want you to give this letter to my daughter after the funeral. I do not want you to give it to her before. I do not want her to know I was dying before I told her. I do not want her to know I was dying of the same thing Daniel died of. I sat in the chair. She held out a small envelope. The envelope was old. The envelope was the color of paper that has been held for a long time. The envelope was addressed to me, in my mother's handwriting, with my full name, to Ida, my Ida, only when after. The envelope had been sealed in 1973 and had been resealed at some point, in a different wax, with a small thumbprint. I held the envelope in both hands. I held it the way my mother had held me when I was a baby, at the small of my back, with the fingers under the head. She said, she asked me to give it to you after the service. She asked me to make sure you read it before you leave the building. She said, she will try to leave without reading it. Make her read it. I sat in the chair. I held the envelope. She said, your mother was the kindest person I have ever been in a room with. I have been in a room with a lot of people. I have been in rooms with kings. I have been in rooms with murderers. I have been in rooms with people who have done beautiful things. Your mother was the kindest. She wrote to me for 55 years. She came to see Daniel's grave every May, until last year, when she could not. She came with a flower. She came alone. She stood for 2 hours. She cried. She talked to him about you. She talked to him about her work. She talked to him about the small ache in her chest she had been carrying since 1971. I sat in the chair. She said, she told me, 6 months ago, when she called to say she was dying, that she wanted you to know about Daniel. She wanted you to know that you were not her only child. She wanted you to know that she had been a mother before she was a mother to you. She wanted you to know that the mother you had was the mother who could not be a mother and had been a mother anyway. She wanted you to know that the small ache in her chest she had been carrying since 1971 had a name. The name was Daniel. I held the envelope. I held it for a long time. I held it in the room, in the chair where my mother had sat at my father's funeral, in the chair my mother had sat in at every funeral she had attended since she was 28. The woman stood. She did not hand me her card. She did not give me her address. She did not say she would call. She said, she will live in this letter now. She will be in this letter the way she was in the kitchen, the way she was in the chair, the way she was in the room I sat in with her when Daniel was small. She will be in the letter and you will read it, and then she will be gone from you. I am sorry. I am sorry I came to take her away from you one more time. I did not move. She said, I am sorry I am a stranger at your mother's funeral. I am sorry I am the woman at the back of the room. I am sorry I am the woman who has been carrying your mother's letters for 55 years, and who has only now, after she died, been allowed to give them back. I stood. I took her hand. I held it for a long time. I held it the way her son had been held. I held it, briefly, in the way my mother would have held her son's hand, if she had been allowed. I sat back down. I sat in the chair. I held the envelope. I said, very quietly, will you sit with me while I read it? She said yes. The letter my mother had written in 1973. She sat beside me. She was wearing the same black coat. I held the envelope. I broke the wax. I pulled out the letter. I unfolded it. The letter was 3 pages. The handwriting was her handwriting. The paper was the same paper my mother had used in every letter she had ever written, the plain white paper, the kind they sell at a stationery store she had gone to since she was 22. The ink was the same blue she had used in every letter. The first sentence was the sentence she had begun every letter with, in every letter she had ever written. My Ida. Then, I am writing this on a Tuesday in May, in 1973. You are 8 months old. You are sleeping in a bassinet in the room next to me. I have been trying to bring your brother home for 2 years. I have not been able to bring him home. I write to the woman who has him, every year, on his birthday, and ask her to let me bring him back. She writes to me, every year, on his birthday, and says she is sorry. She will think about it. She is trying to. Daniel is 3. Daniel calls me Ruthie. Daniel does not know I am his mother. Daniel does not know he has a sister. Daniel is, in the rooms where I cannot see him, a child in another woman's hands. I have a chest pain, sometimes. It is not a chest pain from the heart. It is a chest pain from the place where a child was supposed to be and was not. The chest pain has a name. The chest pain is Daniel. I have you. You are 8 months old. You are sleeping in a bassinet. You are the perfect second child of a woman who could not be a perfect first mother. I am going to try, with you, to be a better mother than I was with him. I am going to try not to hold you too tightly. I am not going to try not to hold you too tightly by being careful. I am going to try not to hold you too tightly by being honest. I am going to lie less. I am going to tell you, when you are older, that I had a son before you. I am going to tell you, when you are older, that I lost him, and that the loss is the way I lost him, not the way I lost your father, not the way I lost Aunt Mary, not the way I lost any of the other people we have lost. The loss is going to be a room in our house. I am going to leave the door open. I am going to tell you, when you are older, that Daniel died of a thing my chest was carrying. I am going to tell you, when you are older, that I have the same thing in my chest. I am going to tell you, when you are older, that I have known about the thing since I was 24, and that the woman who had Daniel has carried the thing with me, in her chest, for 55 years, in letters, in a small grave in a cemetery outside Trenton that I have been to every May since 1971. I am going to tell you, when you are older, that I love you. I am going to tell you, when you are older, that the love I have for you is half the love I have. The other half is in a grave outside Trenton. I am going to die with this letter in an envelope. The envelope is going to be given to you by the woman who has Daniel. She has been instructed to give it to you after the service. She has been instructed to make sure you read it before you leave the building. She has been instructed to give it to you only if you are brave enough to ask for it. I have known, since 1973, that you would be brave enough. Do not be afraid of the part where I had a son. Do not be afraid of the part where I could not bring him home. Do not be afraid of the part where I am telling you this at my funeral. I am telling you at my funeral because I could not figure out, in 55 years, a kinder way to say it. I am telling you at my funeral because I could not figure out, in 55 years, a more honest way. I am telling you at my funeral because I have been waiting, since 1973, to say the only thing I have ever been afraid to say. Your brother is in a grave outside Trenton. His name is Daniel. He is 3. He died of a thing my chest was carrying. You are 8 months old. You are sleeping in a bassinet. I am sitting at the kitchen table. I am writing this letter in the same kitchen, at the same table, in the same chair, where I will die, 55 years from now, of the same thing. I love you. I was your mother. I was his mother. I am both. I did not read it aloud. I read it. In the room. In the chair. With the woman who had Daniel sitting beside me. With the funeral director folding chairs in the background. With the harpist packing her harp in the lobby. With the wilted peony on the table. With the watermelon photograph at the front. In the room. In the chair. Where my mother had sat at every funeral she had attended since she was 28. I read it once. I read it twice. I read it a third time, very slowly, with the woman beside me. With the woman's hand on my knee, the thing she had given me. The woman left at 4:14 p.m. She left, briefly, with a small hug, with a small card with a single phone number on it, with the words, "Call me when you can, but don't call me when you can't. I will be here for as long as you need me." I sat in the chair. I held the letter. I held the letter to my chest. I held it the way my mother had held me when I was 8 months old, at the small of my back, with the fingers under the head. My son came into the room. He said, "Mom, are you okay?" I said, "Yes." He said, "What is the letter?" I said, "It's from your grandmother." He said, "Did she write it before she died?" I said, "She wrote it in 1973. He said, "Mom?" I said, "She wrote it in 1973 for me. She wrote it for the day she would die. She wrote it